Masechet Ketubot Daf Nun Daled, we plan to complete the fourth perek and begin the fifth perek on this daf. The Mishnah mentioned that one of the stipulations in the Ketubah is that after the death of the husband, his property will provide for his wife's sustenance and housing. Atehei yatva bebeti, you can remain living in my house all the days of your widowhood. Taneh Rav Yosef bebeti velo bebikati. Since the language of the Ketubah says in my house, and it doesn't say in my hovel, that means that if he has a big house that can hold both his wife and his children that are living in the house, then fine. His sons must allow the wife to, that's not necessarily the mother, it could be a stepmother, so they have to allow her to remain. But if it's a very small house, so just a hovel, just a tent, and there's not enough room for everyone, then the wife does not get the right to take the house for herself. If there's not enough room, rather the sons get primary a preference to live there and not the wife. But nevertheless, Rav Yosef teaches that even if she ends up being a very small shack and there's no room for her, she has to live somewhere else, nevertheless she still gets sustenance, she still gets fed from the inheritance. However, Morad Bashe says if she doesn't get housing, she doesn't get food either. They go together, it's both or neither. But the halacha does not follow him. In fact, even if there's no room in the house for her, she still will get food. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shemuel Teba'u halinaseh v'nitpayesa en la mezonot ha'lo nitpayesa yesh la mezonot. Okay, now a wife is sustained after her husband's death as long as she's not married. If she remarries, then for sure, that's it. Her new husband will take care of her. What we're about to learn is that even before she actually gets remarried, if she's already going out with another guy or shows interest that she's dating another guy, she removes herself from her husband's domain. She only gets sustained from her husband's inheritance while she's still emotionally attached to her deceased husband. So, if someone proposed to her and she agreed, she has no mizonot anymore. What we modern days call engagement, that he proposed, she agreed. There's no halachic ramifications for that, not kiddushin yet. But as she showed that she said she wants to marry this guy, that's it. She is no longer thinking about connected to her husband. She's moving on, so she doesn't get food. Now we analyze the statement of Shemuel. According to that means anytime she did not agree, then she would still continue to get mizonot, even if maybe she is dating, she's interested in marrying, but maybe some guy who she doesn't like proposed to her and she turned him down. But should she still get sustenance? Just because she didn't like that guy? But the fact is that she is dating, so maybe that's enough that she should not get sustenance anymore from the inheritance. So is that what Shemuel means to say? Amar Rav Anan ledidi mefarsheh limine demo Shemuel. So Rav Anan says, Shemuel explained exactly what he meant to me. Amra mechamat peloni ba'ali yesh la mezonot. If someone comes and proposes to her and says, no, sorry, I'm still too emotionally attached to my deceased husband, and therefore I am not ready to get remarried, in that case, she continues to get sustenance because she deserves it, right? She's thinking about her husband, so her husband's property will continue to sustain her. But if someone proposes to her and she turns him down because she doesn't like him, you're not suitable for me, but otherwise, if it was someone suitable, she would marry him, well then that shows that she is ready to move on. She's not connected to her husband, her deceased husband anymore, and therefore, from that moment, even before marriage, already she loses her rights for food from the inheritance. If she goes and has relations with a man after her husband's death, also that stops the sustenance. That means she moved on. She's thinking about other guys and not her husband anymore. Amar Rav Yosef ki hala ufir kesa en la mezonot. If she put on makeup and dyed her hair and got her attractive to look nice on a date, then also to attract men, she does not get mizonot anymore because she shows that she is no longer connected, thinking about, emotionally attached to her husband. She's ready to move on, and from that moment, she loses the rights to sustenance. Now, you could read these as agreeing with each other, but the Gemara assumes that they're disagreeing. If someone says that if the woman has bi'ah with someone else, he would agree all the more so if she made herself up and put makeup on, because putting makeup on is a more deliberate act that she is premeditated, saying, I'm deciding, I'm thinking about someone else, whereas the bi'ah might just be something that is a last minute and not planned. On the other hand, the person who says that she stops getting sustenance once she puts on makeup to look good for dates, would say at that point she stops. But if she had relations with someone else, then that does not show that she moved on yet, and she should still get sustained. Why? Because it's her desire that forced her. It was just not a premeditated decision to say, okay, I'm ready to move on, but just something that happened in the moment, that her inclination got the better of her, but it doesn't necessarily show that she emotionally has moved on. Okay, now even though we just saw a whole bunch of opinions that say that she loses sustenance at some point when she shows that she wants to marry another, but velet hilcheta kechol hanishma'ateta, the halacha l'maaseh does not follow any of those opinions. אלא כי הדה אמר רב יהודה, אמר שמואל, התובעת כתובתה בבית דין, אין לה מזונות. But rather, what Rav Yehuda quoted in the name of Shemuel, that only when she claims her marriage document in Bet Din, then she stops getting mezonot. In other words, she has a choice. She can be sustained. Don't collect her ketubah and just get daily food from the inheritance. Or she can come and say, I want the full payout, the one lump sum of the entire ketubah. Once she gets that payout, then that severs her connection. So it's really all in her hands to decide when she wants to. And so just because she's dating someone, that will not stop it. Okay, now we ask, Velo, is that true that she will not receive sustenance once she makes a claim for her ketubah? And only then, v'hatanya machra ketubata, mishkena ketubata, asta ketubata, apotiki le'acher en la mezonot, hanein aval tobaat la. The Baraita says that as soon as a woman sells her ketubah, right, she can sell the right to collect her ketubah to someone else. So basically, she's monetizing the ketubah, and at that point, she's using it as money, and so therefore, she doesn't deserve the mizonot anymore. She's basically getting a payout, except that the payout is from a third party rather than from the inheritance directly. Or if she uses the contract as collateral or an apotiki, similar to a collateral, she's putting a lien on it that she will pay back this debt from the ketubah. So then also she's monetizing it, and at that point already she's showing that, I want the payout of the ketubah, and she does not get sustained anymore. So we can infer from here that yes, in these cases she loses her ketubah, but if she only claimed it, then not yet. She should not yet lose it because she didn't yet actually get the payout. She only claimed it. So how do we resolve this contradiction? In these three things, when she sells it or uses it as a collateral or as a lien, that she loses her right to sustenance, whether that happens in a court or even outside a court. She just sees someone and says, hey, I want some cash, I want to buy this, hey, I'll sell you my ketubah. At that point, she loses it, even outside of court. Tovat bebetin in, shelo bebetin lo. But if she comes as she wants to claim, so if she claims it officially in a court, right, she comes to court and says, I want my payout. From that moment that she makes the claim, she loses the sustenance. But if she makes the claim outside of Bet Din, she just comes to one of the inheritors, say, I would like to get the payout. It's not official at that point, so she doesn't yet forfeit the right until they actually pay for it. All right, the next clause in the Mishnah says, "V'kach hayu anshe Yerushalayim." In Jerusalem and in the Galilee, they would write in the marriage contract that says they would write in the marriage contract that the widow, remains in the house and is sustained by the inheritance for the duration of her widowhood. And that would be true until she decides she wants to get remarried or collect the payout. It's in her hands. However, in Judea, we saw that the custom is to write that it's until the heirs decide that they want to pay her out. In other words, not only she has the option, let's call it the brothers would also have the option, actually the sons would also have the option to say, hey, we want to pay out the ketubah and we don't want to sustain you and we don't want to have you live in the house. They have the option to do that. Okay, so that's in Judea. Itmar Rav Amar halacha k'anshe Yehuda. Rav said that the orphans have the prerogative to give the one-time payout. Ushmuel Amar halacha k'anshe Galil. Shmuel says, no, they don't. The widow can stay as long as she wants. Bavel v'chol parvadaha nahug kerav. Now, Babylonia and all of the surrounding towns would follow Rav, who followed the people in Yehuda that give the orphans more rights. Neharda'ah v'chol parvadaha nahug kishmuel. Neharda'ah is a city in Bavel. But so Bavel means the rest of the parts of Bavel. But Neharda'ah and its surrounding towns, they followed Shemuel. That does not give that option to the orphans. Now, Hahi bat Mechoza, interesting story about someone who was born in Mechoza, that's in the rest of Bavel. She married a man who was from Neharda'ah. Atula kameh de Rav Nachman. And now exactly this case happened. The husband died, and they come to judgment before Rav Nachman. Shema'a lekala de bat Mechoza ahi. Rav Nachman heard her accent that she came from Mechoza, which was part of Bavel, and so he said, the orphans here wanted to give her a payout and not have to sustain her and keep her in the house. So he said, since you're from Mechoza, the falacha follows Rav, so the orphans have the option. Amar lehu Bavel v'chol parvano kerav, and he reasoned because Bavel and all its surroundings, including Mechoza, follow Rav. Amru leh. However, the people who were there, who were advocating on behalf of the widow, they said, yeah, but she's marrying someone who is from Neharda'ah. And they probably were there for a living, actually, in Neharda'ah. So it doesn't matter where she came from or where she is now and where the husband is from. I'm glad you told me that. I was only going by her accent, but now that you told me that she married someone from Neharda'ah, in that case they follow Shemuel, and the orphans do not have the option, and they have to sustain her continually. How do you define what is the province of Neharda'ah? Wherever they use the kav measurement of Neharda'ah, they did not have standardized measurements in all provinces. Like today, some people use centimeters, some people use inches, and so wherever they use the Nehard'i and Kav, that would be considered that area for this halacha. Good. Itmar almana Rav Amar shamin ma she'aleha u'Shmuel Amar en shamin ma she'aleha. So another law regarding what the payout should be to an almana. She is wearing clothes. What about the clothes that she is actually wearing? And so if when the orphans come to give a payout, do they include what she's actually wearing? Rav says yes. Whatever the clothing that she is currently wearing, that she currently has in her closet too, that is part of the payout, and she already has it because she's wearing it, and so they can deduct that from the total. Shemuel says no, that what she's wearing is just hers. That's hers already. The husband's not giving it to her. She already has it. They have to give out the full sum separate from the clothing that she currently has. Amar Rav Chiya bar Avin v'chilufa belakit. Rabbi Chiya bar Avin says the Rav and Shemuel would say the opposite opinions regarding a hired worker. You hire someone for a certain job, and then you're going to pay them. So what happens sometimes, a hired worker, the owner would also give them clothing, work clothing, to use while they work. And now he comes to pay them. So can he include the amount of the clothing that he gave them, a uniform or whatever it is that he gave them? So here would be the opposite. Shemuel said that you can deduct the amount of the clothing from the total salary. And Rav says, no, you cannot deduct the total clothing. That's one version. Rav Kana matne v'chen belakit, but Rav Kana said, no, not the opposite in the case of the hired worker, but the same thing, that Rav would say you can deduct the clothing both for the widow and for the hired worker. And he even had a mnemonic to remember this, that an orphan and a widow, you tell them disrobe and remove them. Now, widow refers to the case of the widow we were talking about. Orphan here refers not to a literal orphan, but rather to a hired worker. But typically, orphans are impoverished and they have to do day labor, and so also people that are poor have to be day laborers. Okay, so it means that both the day laborer and the case of a widow, we look at their clothing and we say, listen, you can keep the clothing, but it will be deducted from your ketubot payout or your salary, or if you want, you can remove your clothing and give it back, and then you'll get the cash value instead. It doesn't mean that literally we're going to make them strip, but rather that they have a decision to keep that clothing as part of the payout. Amar Rav Nachman, afal gav ditnan bematnitin kevate. The point is that the clothing belongs to the husband and the boss, and so that the clothing that they have, since it belongs to them, since it belongs to the husband and the boss, therefore, if the widow and the worker are keeping it, then it's deducted. Okay. Rav Nachman says, even though we have a Mishnah that we're about to see that follows Shemuel, so you'd think that would be the halacha. Nevertheless, in this case, the halacha actually follows Rav, which is interesting. Ditnan, Mishnah Arachin says, someone says, I consecrate all my property to the Bet HaMikdash. Or he consecrates himself, his own value. He donates to the Bet HaMikdash a fixed amount. En lo bichsut ishto, velo bichsut banav, velo besevar shesavat lishman, velo besandalim hadashim shelakach lishman. So if he donates everything that he owns, he can only possibly give the things that he himself owns. But the items that his wife or children own, he does not have a right to take them and to donate them. So therefore, this does not include his wife's clothing. So there you go. That's what's important for us. See that a husband does not actually own the clothing that his wife is wearing. This seems to include also the clothing that's in her closet. Her clothing is not his to give away, and that would follow Shemuel, who says that you cannot deduct the amount of her clothing. She owns her clothing already, so he has to give the payout besides that. Also, the clothing of his children does not belong to him, so he can't donate it. Or if he dyed some clothing specially for them, even if they didn't wear it yet, but he bought it or prepared it specially for them, it's already theirs. Or new sandals that he bought for his wife or for his children, they also belong to them. This is not common property that they all use like a chair, but rather something that only fits them and therefore belongs to them. So you see that this Mishnah follows Shemuel. Nevertheless, halacha does not follow that. Amar le Rav Nachman, v'chi mechad itnan matnitin kevate de Shmuel, amay hilcheta kevate de Rav. So the question is, if the Mishnah follows Shemuel, then why does the halacha follow Rav? Amar le lichora k'Shmuel rita, v'ki ma'yant ba hilcheta kevate de Rav. He says, yes, on a first reading, it seems that this Mishnah supports Rav. But if you examine it more deeply, you'll see that actually this Mishnah supports it seems that it supports Shemuel, but if you examine it more deeply, you'll see that this Mishnah actually supports Rav. How so? My ta'ama, ki aknila adata lemekam kameh, adata lemishkal umepak la aknila. Because in this case, when the husband is buying clothing for his wife, or preparing, dyeing clothing for his wife, he has in mind, I'm going to get her this nice special dress so that she can wear it in front of me while we're married, right? I want to be married and see her in this nice dress. But I'm not buying it for her so that she can leave me and take it with her upon divorce. That's not what I had in mind. So therefore, the point is that it only while they're married, then he says, yeah, it's yours. To the extent that if he donates everything that's his, this is not included. But he does not have in mind that she should keep it at the dissolution of a marriage, and so therefore the halacha, this Mishnah actually supports Rav, and that's why halacha is like Rav. Now, a couple of stories. The daughter-in-law of the house of the daughter-in-law of the son of Eliashiv was claiming her ketubah from the orphans. Her husband died, and then she goes to the orphans, who are the inheritors, and say, pay me the ketubah. So they have to pay, let's say $1,000. And the orphans, and she said, okay, that's it. We're going to Betin. Right? She summons them to Betin. Amri zila lan mileta de tezli hachi. So these orphans are very concerned about how their stepmother, presumably their stepmother, will look in court. And they said, it's demeaning for us, meaning for you, that you should be dressed in this manner. She was wearing just some old clothes, some old rags, and says, we're going to Beit Din. You should look nicer when you go to Beit Din. So, make sure to dress well. Azla lebishtinhu veikastinhu lekule mana. So she did. The wife went, and the widow, and she went and dressed herself with all of her fine clothes, the finest of her clothes. Atu lekame de Ravina. Amar lehu ilchata kevate de Rav. Damar almana shamin masha aleha. So they came to Ravina and says, the law is like Rav, that the almana, we appraise the clothes that she is wearing, and we deduct that from the ketubah. And therefore, they deducted everything she was wearing. So you see, these orphans, inheritors, kind of tricked her by showing as if they're concerned. Oh, we want to make sure you look nice. Make sure to wear your nicest fine dress. But really, they had intention to include that in the payout, so that they would have to pay less from their own land. So this was a kind of a trick that they used against her. Hahud amar lehu nedunya librat. A certain person said to his heirs before he died, he says, listen, I'm going to die, but I want you to give a dowry to my daughter. He's telling his sons who are going to inherit him, and that would mean a given amount. The usual dowry. Let's say the usual dowry is $1,000, and it will include all kinds of things, clothing, jewelry. Zal nedunya. But in the meantime, the cost of the dowry depreciated. In other words, you could buy the very same list of items for only $800. So now what? To the inheritors, to the sons, do they have to give her $1,000 worth of items, or do they just give her the items that were once $1,000, but they could spend $800 on them and buy the same things and keep the $200? Amar Rav Idi bar Avin purna liyatmeh. So he says the profit of that dowry goes to the orphans. Right? The orphans get precedent. The daughter is getting the dowry that the father said, because she's getting all the items that are on the list. So she's not really losing out. This happens to be that the prices have changed. Haud amar lehu, similar story. Arba me'a zuzeh min hamra liberat. Someone says to his heirs, after I die, I want you to provide a dowry for my daughter of 400 dinar worth of wine. For my daughter. In the meantime, the price of wine went up. Amar Rav Yosef, Rav Chad liyatmeh. So Rav Yosef said that the gain goes to the orphan. So if there was, if it was one a dinar, a bottle, then in the original price, they would have had to provide 400 bottles. But now, let's say the price doubled, they only have to provide 200 bottles of wine because that is the same price as what he said. Keribeh de Rabbi Yochanan, hava lehu itat abba, tava kamafseda mezoneh. Another story about Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan had a wife of the relatives of Rabbi Yochanan had a stepmother. Right, Rabbi Yochanan's relatives had a stepmother, and she was alive, the husband was alive, and she was diminishing all of the sustenance. She's spending a lot, and so the sons, they're taking a look ahead at their future inheritance when their father dies. It keeps getting dwindled because the stepmother is spending everything, and they're really concerned. So they go to Rabbi Yochanan, what should we do? Atula kamed Rabbi Yochanan, amar lehu, ezilu v'imru le'ela buchon, din yached la'ad alim zona. I have a good idea. Go and tell your father to tell her that he's going to set aside one portion of land for her sustenance. Now it looks like they're doing her a favor. Listen, we have this piece of land. We're going to devote it special for you. You will get this land, and its profits, its produce will all be dedicated for your expenses. And if she agrees to that, then it looks like they're doing her a favor, but in fact they're actually limiting what she can collect, and she will only be sustained from that piece of land and have no access to the rest of the property. So that's Rabbi Yochanan's trick that he's going to use for this stepmother who's spending too much. All right, Atule Kameh de Resh Lakish. The father eventually died, and they come to Resh Lakish to settle the matter. Amar lehu kol sheken shedibala mezonot. He says, sorry, your trick did not work. Now you gave her this land. She has that exclusive right to collect from that land, and you still have to pay her all of the sustenance that is stipulated in the ketubah. So you actually have to give her the same amount, and she even has a benefit that if there's insufficient funds, she'll be sustained from that piece of land as well. They told Resh Lakish, wait, but we consulted with our relative Rabbi Yochanan. He didn't say that. He said that if we designate just one piece of land, then she will only get sustained from that piece of land and nothing else. Amar lehu zilu habula. Resh Lakish got upset. Says, go, you have to give her the full amount. And if you don't, I'm gonna pull Rabbi Yochanan out of your ear. A way of saying, I'm gonna be harsh with you, and I don't care what Rabbi Yochanan said. You heard what Rabbi Yochanan said. I'll pull that out of your ear, and I'm going to judge against you anyway. So that Resh Lakish disagreed. Atula kamed Rabbi Yochanan. So now these relatives went to Rabbi Yochanan and they said, oh, you told us that we should do this, it would work. Come and defend us. Go tell Resh Lakish. Amar lehu ma'aseh shekenegdi chaluk alai. Says, what can I do? Right? Kenegdi, my colleague who's equal to me, disagrees with me. So I told you my opinion, but Resh Lakish is the one adjudicating. Rabbi Yochanan, I'm sure, would have had to recuse himself as a relative. And so Resh Lakish, that's his opinion. So what can I do? You have to follow what he said. Amar Rabbi Abu, Ledidi mefashali mine de Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Abu says Rabbi Yochanan actually explained it to me why he thought one halacha and Resh Lakish thought a different one. They weren't necessarily disagreeing. It could depend on the exact wording that you use. Amar limzonot ribala mezonot. If you say I am giving you this particular land limzonot for your sustenance, so then he's giving that in addition. I'm giving you sustenance, and I'm going to designate this particular piece of land that will be exclusively used for your sustenance to make sure that it will always be a full amount. So then that would be what Resh Lakish said. Amar bimzonot kasas la mezonot. If they wanted to limit her, then they would have to say, we're giving you this land as your sustenance. So it means instead of getting sustenance from all of our property, you're only going to get it from this. This is your sustenance only. And in that case, that would be the fixed amount and no more. And that would be the case of Rabbi Yochanan. Hadran alach na'ara. And so that completes the fourth perek. And now we begin just the Mishnah and a little bit of discussion of the fifth perek. Mishnah. Af al pi she'amru betula gova 200 almana maneh, im rasa losif afilu me'a maneh yosif. Okay, even though the rabbi said that the basic amount is that for a betula, she gets 200, and an almana, anyone that was married already, only gets 100. That's the base amount. That's the minimum. But if a man wants to increase and give more, he can give even 100 maneh, meaning he can give 10,000 zuz, and he can give as much as he wants. The sky is the limit, and that's permitted. Nit armela o nit karesha ben mina erusin ben mina nisuin goba et hakol. If she is widowed or she gets divorced, whether they only had kiddushin or whether they were fully married, she collects all of it, not just the 100 or 200, even the added amount. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer mina nisuin goba et hakol mina erusin betula goba 200 almana maneh shelo katab la ela amen. Not lechonsa. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah disagrees and says, if they were married, then yes, they get the whole thing. But that full amount, let's say the extra 1,000, was only meant for marriage. If they only had kiddushin, then she only collects the base amount. For a betula, 200. For an almana, 100. Because the husband only wrote the added amount on condition that they would complete the marriage and do the full chuppah and everything. And that's why he said the full 1,000 is so that what is for when we get married. He didn't have in mind that if the kiddushin is broken off, that he would pay that. But the minimum amount, everyone agrees, he has to pay even after a kiddushin. רבי יהודה אומר, אם רסה כותב לבתולה שטר של 200, והיא כותבת התקברתי ממך מנה, או מנה, והיא כותבת התקברתי ממך 50 זוז. So while it's true that the minimum amount is 200 and 100, Rabbi Yehuda says, let's say a guy wants to give less. Well, you can't just write in the ketubah less. That's not going to work because there's a minimum amount. But here's what you could do. You could write in the ketubah 200, but she will write a receipt that says, I received 100. Even though she actually didn't receive anything, that's the equivalent of her foregoing 100 of it, and so what will be left would be 100 payout. Or if it's almanah who only gets 100 to begin with, they'll write down 100 in the ketubah, and she'll write a receipt that says, I received 50, and then at the end of that marriage, he'll only have to pay the remaining 50. Rabbi Yehuda says that is permitted to do. רבי מאיר אומר, כל הפוחת לבתולה מ200 ולאלמנה ממנה, הרי זו בעילת זנות. Rabbi Meir, however, disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda and says, no, you cannot do it, not even that way with a receipt. If you give any less to a betula than 200 or an almana 100, then that is not considered a proper marriage. And the bi'ah they have is only a promiscuous bi'ah and not for the sake of marriage. He didn't guarantee her this minimum amount, so his marriage is not a valid contract. Okay, now we ask just on the beginning, Peshita. Isn't this obvious that if a man wants to increase the amount, that he can give more? Maudetema kisuta abdu rabbanan shelo levayesh et mi she'en lo kamashmalan. Oh, so I might have thought that maybe the rabbis made, in fact, a fixed ceiling so that one person will not be embarrassed from another. You have a minimum amount. That way there won't be competition, and the person who can't afford so much, he's only going to be able to give an added $10, and the person who's very wealthy is going to get add $1 million, and the poor person will feel embarrassed. We might have thought that would be the case, but the Mishnah teaches not so. The person, everyone can give as much as they can afford, as much as they negotiate when they are making the marriage, and that is a valid part of the contract. We'll end with that. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.